Part 1. Little Prince. The wind clawed at the mountain all night. It screamed across the peaks, rushed through the narrow mouth of the cave, and scattered sparks from the fire into the darkness. Beyond the entrance, the world had vanished beneath snow and cloud. Nothing existed past the edge of the firelight except the storm and the black drop waiting beyond the ledge. Ahret slept beside me. She had curled herself around the warmest part of the cavern, her muted silver scales rising and falling with each slow breath. One wing lay folded tightly against her side, while the other rested partly over me, shielding the fire from the worst of the wind. Her head rested upon her forelegs, close enough that I could feel the cold mist of her breathing against my cloak. Even asleep, she was larger than anything had a right to be, and she was still young. I leaned against the saddlebag beneath my shoulders and opened the old spellbook across my knees. The firelight crept over its worn cover, but I did not read. My thoughts had wandered too far backward. They often did when the mountains grew quiet. I was born in Ro. It is pronounced Ro, though few people living today would know that. Fewer still would care. Ro was never a great kingdom. It had no golden capital, no fleet of ships, and no vast army marching beneath banners that darkened the horizon. It was a hard country of stone valleys, cold rivers, and villages built wherever the soil allowed men to survive. My father ruled only a small part of it. He was called a king, though greater rulers might have named him a lord, a chieftain, or something even less respectful. His lands consisted of a fortified town, several farming villages, and a narrow mountain road that merchants used when the weather permitted. It was not much. To him, it was everything. Our bloodline had served beside dragons for generations. We were riders or knights, depending upon which surviving tale one chooses to believe. My ancestors had flown beside the silver dragons long before Ro had walls, crowns, or written histories. The alliance was older than my father's kingdom, perhaps older than his name. Nisei was the silver queen who guarded our lands, not the queen of all silver dragons. Dragons are no more united beneath one crown than humans are. Nisei ruled her own bloodline, her own mountain, and the ancient nesting caverns beneath it. She was powerful enough that even kings spoke carefully in her presence. My father called her friend. I called her mother. I remember none of Ro with my own eyes. Everything I know came from Nisei, from broken records, and from the memories of dragons old enough to have watched the kingdom die. The elves had ruled over the human lands for generations. They took grain, metal, timber, and children whenever their armies required them. Human craftsmen were forbidden from producing weapons equal to those carried by elven soldiers. Human mages were watched, bound into service, or quietly executed before they became dangerous. The people of Ro endured because endurance was the only choice they had been given, until it was not. The rebellion began with the hanging of 3 farmers who refused to surrender their winter stores. It spread through villages already starving beneath elven taxes. Blacksmiths worked at night. Hunters became scouts. Old swords were pulled from family tombs and sharpened for hands that had never held anything deadlier than a plow. My father joined them. Then he led them. For 10 years, Ro fought. 10 years of ambushes, burned fields, shattered walls, and graves dug into frozen earth. The humans knew the mountains better, and for a time that was enough. They struck elven supply columns, collapsed roads, and vanished into forests before retaliation arrived. But courage does not make iron stronger. It does not place food in an empty stomach. It does not replace every soldier who falls. The elves had greater numbers, stronger armor, better weapons, trained battle mages, and the resources of an empire behind them. Ro had farmers, miners, hunters, and a handful of dragon riders bound to a dwindling line of aging dragons. By the 10th year, The rebellion had become less of a war and more of an execution carried out one village at a time. My father knew the end was coming. I was still an infant when he climbed Nisei's mountain for the final time. The journey took him through a blizzard. He arrived wounded, half frozen, and carrying me beneath his cloak. Nisei told me that he refused to kneel when he entered her cavern, not because he lacked respect, because he feared that, if he lowered himself, he would no longer possess the strength to rise. He placed me before her and begged her to take me. Nisei had fought beside my ancestors, but the silver dragons had suffered greatly during the rebellion. Their nests had been attacked. Their eggs had been destroyed. Several of her children had been slain by poisoned elven bolts and spells designed specifically to pierce dragon scales. She could not save Ro without sacrificing what remained of her own bloodline. My father did not ask her to. He asked only that she save me. Nisei agreed. I sometimes wonder what he felt when he walked away. Relief, perhaps. Shame. Hope. I know only that he did not look back. He descended the mountain alone and returned to a kingdom that would not survive the season. Ro fell before the winter ended. My father died with it. The fire cracked loudly, pulling me back into the cavern. Arate shifted in her sleep. One claw scraped across the stone, and her tail tightened slightly around the edge of our camp. I rested my hand against the warm scales beside me until she settled. "I am still here," I whispered. One golden eye opened. It watched me for several seconds, filled with all the silent judgment only a dragon can possess. Then the eye closed again. I smiled, despite myself. Nisei raised me in the nesting caverns of the silver dragons. There were no human nurses, tutors, or servants. My earliest memories are of stone halls large enough to swallow castles and voices deep enough to shake dust from the ceiling. I learned to walk between claws larger than my body. I slept against warm scales during mountain winters and thought nothing unusual of waking beneath a dragon's wing. I grew up among giants. They gave me a dragon name, though my human tongue could never shape it properly. Even now I cannot pronounce every sound without feeling as though I am attempting to swallow gravel. The younger dragons shortened it whenever they spoke to me. Moxtwanatrakes, little prince. They rarely meant it kindly. To them, I was a soft, wingless creature Nisei had collected from the ruins below. I could not fly. I could not breathe frost. My teeth were useless. My skin had no scales, and I required clothing merely to survive the cold. They would place scraps of polished metal upon my head and bow dramatically whenever I entered a cavern. "Make way for Moxtwanatrakes. Protect your treasure, little prince. Careful, little prince. The stones may bruise your royal feet." I believed them. For years I truly thought I was a prince. Why would I not? Nisei was a queen. She called me son. The other dragons called me prince, and I was too young to understand laughter hidden beneath their words. By the time I understood the insult, the title had already become part of me. Perhaps that is why I never stopped carrying myself like royalty, even when dressed in torn leather and sleeping upon cave floors. Nisei never lied about what I was. She told me early that she had not laid the egg from which I came. Humans were born differently, she explained, though her first attempt at that conversation was so painfully direct that I avoided looking at her for nearly a month afterward. I knew she was not my true mother. I simply did not care. Blood had given me a father I could not remember and a kingdom I had never seen. Nisei gave me a childhood. She taught me to read the old languages carved into the mountain walls. She taught me the history of dragons, the discipline of magic, and the difference between possessing power and deserving it. When nightmares came, she curled around me until the trembling stopped. A mother is not merely the creature that brings you into the world. A mother is the one who teaches you how to survive it. Arate's head moved against the stone. Without opening her eyes, she nudged her snout against my shoulder, hard enough to nearly knock the spellbook from my hands. "Yes," I murmured. "I know." Her breathing deepened once more. I closed the book and looked toward the cave entrance. Snow swept across the opening like ash from a burning kingdom. Somewhere beneath those mountains lay the bones of Ro. Somewhere beneath fallen walls and elven roads rested the man who had carried me through a blizzard and surrendered his son to a dragon queen. For most of my life, I believed that was the end of his story. I would eventually learn that it was only the beginning of mine.